April 2016, Langley, Virginia. Inside a windowless sub-basement of CIA headquarters, a software engineer discovers something he was never meant to find. A folder, no label. Size, 1.8 terabytes. Inside, zero-day exploits, smartphone implants, router backdoors, custom malware suites, operational field manuals, foreign network maps, the complete arsenal of the CIA's cyber operations from 2009 to 2015. Not documentation, not summaries. The actual tools, the digital weapons used to infiltrate foreign governments, monitor terrorist networks, and penetrate systems considered impenetrable. All of it sitting on an internal server, accessible to a handful of engineers, unguarded. The man who found it made a choice. Within a year, these files would appear on screens across the world. Governments would panic, tech companies would scramble, and the CIA would face a question it had spent decades avoiding. Who watches the people who build the weapons? The Central Intelligence Agency employs approximately 21,500 people. Most work in analysis, logistics, administration. A smaller number operate in the field, and a few hundred work in a division the agency prefers not to discuss publicly. In 2016, the CIA's offensive cyber operations were housed in a unit called the Center for Cyber Intelligence. CCI occupied a secure compound in Langley and operated what insiders called DevLAN, a development network air-gapped from the internet, designed to hold the agency's most sensitive digital tools. The people who worked there weren't spies. They were engineers. Elias Cade was one of them, 29 years old, bachelor's degree in computer science from a mid-tier state university, hired in 2012 after a standard background check. His role, maintain internal servers, update malware libraries, support digital operations. He wasn't building the weapons. He was keeping them organized. Cade had a top-secret clearance with access to sensitive compartmented information. In practice, this meant he could see more than most people at his pay grade. The agency trusted him with routine access to systems containing classified material. The agency trusted a lot of people. By 2016, the Center for Cyber Intelligence had a problem. The unit had grown faster than its security infrastructure. Engineers shared passwords. Access logs went unmonitored for months. Temporary workarounds intended to speed up projects became permanent fixtures. A 2017 internal review would later describe the security posture as woefully lax. But in April 2016, no one had written that report yet. On a Tuesday evening, during routine maintenance inside DevLAN, Cade navigated to a directory he had accessed hundreds of times before. But this time, he noticed something different. A subfolder he had never seen. No naming convention. No documentation. Just a string of numbers. He opened it. Inside, 8,161 files. Total size, 1.8 terabytes. The first file he opened was a user manual for something called Weeping Angel. It was a tool designed to turn Samsung smart televisions into covert listening devices. The TV would appear to be off. The microphone would remain active. Audio would be transmitted to a CIA collection server. Cade kept reading. Sonic screwdriver, a method for attacking Apple computers through Thunderbolt accessories during the boot process. Marble framework, software that could alter the digital fingerprints of malware to hide its origin, making American code appear Russian or Chinese or untraceable. There were tools for Android phones, iPhones, Windows systems, Linux servers, routers, vehicle control systems. Years of development, thousands of hours of work, the cumulative knowledge of how to break into nearly any digital system on Earth. Cade wasn't supposed to have access to this directory, but the access controls that should have stopped him didn't exist. The monitoring systems that should have flagged his queries were either disabled or ignored. He was looking at the crown jewels of American cyber operations, and he was the only one who knew. For 3 weeks, Cade said nothing. He returned to the directory several times, verifying what he had seen. Each session lasted no more than 15 minutes. He was careful. He documented nothing. He took no screenshots. He simply read, and then he went home. Outside the classified world of Devlan, 2016 was a turbulent year for American intelligence agencies. 3 years earlier, a contractor named Edward Snowden had revealed the scope of NSA surveillance programs. The fallout had been immense. Congressional hearings, international outrage, promises of reform. Some reforms had passed. Most were modest. The intelligence community's response had been largely defensive. Acknowledge nothing that isn't proven, minimize what is proven, and wait for public attention to move elsewhere. It usually did. Cade had followed the Snowden story closely. He had opinions about surveillance, about privacy, about the appropriate limits of government power. But he had chosen to work at the CIA anyway. He believed in the mission. He believed that intelligence work, done properly, made the country safer. What he had found in that directory didn't look like proper. The tools themselves weren't the problem. Every intelligence agency develops offensive capabilities. That's expected. What troubled Cade was the context. Who authorized these operations? Which ones were ongoing? How many had been disclosed to congressional oversight committees? How many involved American citizens, American companies, American allies? The files didn't answer those questions. They just demonstrated capability. And the capability was vast. Cade began to ask himself a question that he couldn't stop asking. Who watches the people who build the weapons? He knew the official answer. The CIA reported to congressional intelligence committees. The executive branch provided oversight through the National Security Council. Courts approved certain operations through the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. But FISA courts almost never denied requests. Congressional briefings were limited to the Gang of Eight, the most senior members of the intelligence committees, and those briefings often omitted technical details. The executive branch had every incentive to expand capabilities and few incentives to constrain them. Cade wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a policy expert. He was an engineer who maintained servers. But he understood systems, and this system had no effective feedback loop. Sometime in early May, Cade made a decision. He didn't make it all at once. It wasn't a single moment of clarity. It was a gradual process of elimination. He could report his concerns internally. But internal reports about security failures at the CIA had a documented history of going nowhere. Whistleblower protections existed on paper. In practice, they protected no one. He could contact Congress directly, but without documentation, his claims would be dismissed. With documentation, he would be prosecuted. He could do nothing, except that the system was the system. Trust that someone, somewhere, was paying attention. He didn't trust that. Cade decided that the public had a right to know what their government could do, not what it was doing. He didn't have that information, but what it could do, the capabilities that existed, the tools that were available, the power that had been accumulated without public debate. He would copy the files. He would get them out. He would let the world see. He understood what this meant. He was going to betray the agency that employed him. He was going to break laws he had sworn to uphold. He was going to become a criminal. The question was no longer whether, it was how. Exfiltrating 1.8 terabytes from a classified network is not a simple task. The files were too large to transfer at once. Any sudden spike in data movement would trigger automated alerts. The network was air-gapped, meaning there was no internet connection. Data had to leave the building physically. Cade had advantages. He worked in systems administration. He understood the security architecture. More importantly, he understood its gaps. Over a period of several weeks, Cade copied files in small batches. He encrypted each batch separately. He moved them to a staging directory disguised as a system backup partition. The transfers were sized to fall below automatic monitoring thresholds. No one noticed. The final step was physical extraction. Devlan terminals had USB ports, a vulnerability that security audits had flagged repeatedly. The recommendations to disable those ports had never been implemented. Cade brought a USB drive to work. It was labeled as a firmware update tool. Standard equipment for his job. He inserted it into his workstation. He copied the staging partition. Transfer time, 43 minutes. At 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening, Cade removed the drive, placed it in his bag, and walked toward the exit. The walk from his workstation to the parking lot took approximately 4 minutes. He passed 2 security checkpoints. He nodded at a guard he recognized. His bag was not searched. His credentials were not questioned. He was a clean-cut engineer with a valid badge and no history of misconduct. He walked out the door. Inside his bag was the most significant intelligence leak in CIA history. Cade didn't contact WikiLeaks. He didn't reach out to major newspapers. He chose a smaller target. An encrypted forum used by security researchers, privacy advocates, and political dissidents. He created an anonymous account. He uploaded the archive in sections. He attached a statement. The statement read, "These tools control the modern world. No agency should hold this much unchecked power. What you do with this information is your choice. I have made mine." He signed it, a concerned engineer. Within 24 hours, the archive had been downloaded by hundreds of users. Within a week, fragments appeared on darknet forums and security researcher mailing lists. Within a month, journalists at major publications had obtained copies. The leak went public under a name that would dominate headlines for months. The Cade Archive. The reaction was immediate. Apple, Samsung, Google, and Microsoft issued emergency patches for vulnerabilities revealed in the files. Security firms scrambled to analyze tools they had never seen. Foreign governments demanded explanations from American ambassadors. In Germany, the Interior Ministry summoned the U.S. ambassador. In France, prosecutors opened an investigation into potential CIA operations on French soil. In Brazil, the Chamber of Deputies called for hearings. At Langley, the CIA went silent. Internally, the agency was in crisis. The breach had exposed not just tools, but tradecraft. Not just capabilities, but operations. Assets in the field were potentially compromised. Ongoing missions were suspended pending damage assessment. Someone had walked out with their entire playbook, and they had no idea who. The investigation began within hours of the first public reports. A joint task force was assembled, FBI counterintelligence, CIA security, NSA technical analysts. They gave it a code name, Operation Aquila. Their mission, identify the leaker, assess the damage, and determine if a foreign intelligence service was involved. The initial suspect pool was enormous. Approximately 5,000 CIA employees and contractors had some level of access to the systems where the leaked files originated. Of those, roughly 300 had access extensive enough to obtain the full archive. The task force began with those 300. They analyzed access logs, badge swipes, network queries, email metadata. They looked for anomalies, unusual working hours, unexplained file access, behavioral changes. The problem was that Cade had worked in systems administration. His job required him to access files across multiple directories. His queries looked routine because they were routine, until they weren't. For weeks, the investigation made limited progress. The leaker had been careful. No clear digital trail, no suspicious communications, no known foreign contacts. Then an analyst found something. The leaked files retained metadata from their original creation. One batch showed a last accessed timestamp that matched a narrow window, a Tuesday evening in late April. Only 3 employees were logged into Devlan during that window. One was a senior developer who had accessed only her own project files. One was a system administrator performing scheduled maintenance. The third was Elias Cade. The correlation wasn't conclusive. It wasn't enough for a prosecution, but it was enough for a warrant. On a Friday afternoon, FBI agents arrived at Cade's apartment in Northern Virginia. They had authorization to search the premises and seize electronic devices. The apartment was empty. No computers, no hard drives, no USB devices. The furniture was still there. The clothes were still in the closet. But anything digital was gone, and so was Cade's passport. The task force assumed the worst. Cade had fled the country. They alerted international partners. They flagged his name with Interpol. They prepared for the possibility that he was already in Moscow, or Beijing, or some country without an extradition treaty. They were wrong. Cade hadn't left. He had gone underground within the United States. He paid for everything in cash. He stayed in motels that didn't require identification. He avoided highways with automated license plate readers. He never used his phone. For 6 weeks, he moved through the American interior like a ghost. Then, 3 weeks after the apartment search, journalists received a second transmission. New files, different content. This time, the leak wasn't technical, it was administrative. Internal memos documenting security failures. Reports that had been filed and ignored. Warnings about access control vulnerabilities dating back years. Evidence that senior officials knew the systems were insecure and chose not to act. The second leak changed the narrative. The first leak had raised questions about CIA capabilities. The second leak raised questions about CIA competence. This wasn't just about a rogue employee. This was about institutional failure. The agency that claimed to protect American secrets couldn't protect its own. The pressure intensified. Congress demanded briefings. The Inspector General launched a review. The director faced calls for resignation, and somewhere in Colorado, Elias Cade stepped off a Greyhound bus. A facial recognition system flagged the match at 3:47 a.m. FBI agents were on site within 2 hours. They found Cade at an all-night diner 3 blocks from the station. He was eating breakfast alone. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He asked if he could finish his coffee. Elias Cade was indicted on 13 counts: unlawful retention of national defense information, unauthorized disclosure of classified intelligence, theft of government property, computer fraud, obstruction of justice, making false statements, destruction of evidence. Each count carried years of potential prison time. Combined, he faced a maximum sentence exceeding 130 years. Bail was denied. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution's case was methodical. They presented access logs, metadata analysis, timeline reconstructions. They called security experts who testified about the damage to intelligence operations. They played intercepted communications from foreign governments celebrating the leak. They portrayed Cade as a traitor who had endangered American lives for reasons he refused to explain. The defense offered a different framing. Cade's attorneys argued that their client had acted out of conscience. He had discovered evidence of unconstitutional surveillance programs and security failures that endangered the public. He had tried to raise concerns internally and been ignored. He had acted as a whistleblower, not a spy. The government's own witnesses, under cross-examination, admitted that access controls had been inadequate, that warnings had been dismissed, that the breach was enabled by institutional negligence. The defense called former intelligence officers who testified about the limited effectiveness of existing oversight mechanisms. They introduced documents showing that similar security concerns had been raised for years without action. They asked the jury to consider a question the prosecution preferred to avoid. Was the system Cade exposed actually working? The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all major counts. The judge, in her sentencing remarks, acknowledged the complexity of the case. She noted that Cade had not acted for financial gain. She recognized that his disclosures had prompted genuine reforms. She accepted that the agency's security failures had created the conditions for the breach. She then sentenced him to 38 years in federal prison. Cade showed no visible reaction. In her written opinion, the judge addressed the defense's framing directly. She wrote, "The defendant may believe he acted for the public good. That belief does not exempt him from the law. We have processes for addressing government misconduct. Those processes do not include unilateral disclosure of classified intelligence to the world." She continued, "Whatever failures exist in our oversight systems, the solution is not vigilante transparency. It is reform through legitimate means." The defense announced plans to appeal. The appeal is still pending. In the years since the Cade archive became public, the CIA implemented significant security reforms. Access controls were restructured. Monitoring systems were upgraded. USB ports on classified terminals were disabled. The agency adopted a zero-trust security model requiring continuous verification of user identity and authorization. An internal review concluded that the breach was preventable. The failures were not technical. They were organizational. The tools Cade leaked did not disappear. Within months of the disclosure, security researchers found fragments of CIA code embedded in malware attributed to foreign governments. Criminal organizations adapted the techniques for ransomware attacks. The attribution frameworks designed to hide American operations were reverse-engineered and deployed by adversaries. The weapons were copied, modified, deployed. They are still in use. The reforms Cade claimed to want have been partial. Congress passed no new legislation governing offensive cyber operations. The oversight mechanisms he criticized remain largely unchanged. The balance between security and accountability that he sought to shift has not shifted. The debate he wanted to start did start. It did not conclude. Elias Cade is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution. His earliest possible release date is 2048. He has given no interviews. He has made no public statements. The motives he claimed in his initial disclosure remain the only explanation he has offered. Depending on who you ask, Cade is one of two things. He is a traitor who crippled American intelligence capabilities, endangered lives, and armed adversaries with weapons they could not have developed themselves. Or he is the only person who forced the most powerful intelligence agency on Earth to confront its own failures. Both descriptions contain truth. Neither captures the whole. The files Cade leaked are still being analyzed. The tools are still being patched. The damage is still being assessed. The question he asked has not been answered. Who watches the people who build the weapons? Someone should.